What's up, everybody? Episode 31 here. We did not get my Steel It paint that I needed to pull these plates off and spray them and final weld them. So that was supposed to be here when I got home from work. That was not. So I decided to work on the number one bar, which is kind of redundant, I guess, because I do need to pull it back off. But it's also not redundant because now it's cut the length, it's clean. I know how I'm gonna make the bracket. So, and I also confirmed some dimensions and stuff like that of where it's actually sitting, where I'm happy with it and stuff like that. So I'll kind of break down how we got it in here and what we did. So the number one bar is the bar that goes directly behind the main hoop in the car. So I'll pull up the SFI book real quick and kind of show you what that number one bar looks like. So there's a ton of information in this book. And then also that number one bar, they're going to specify that's the rear cross member bar, okay? These are the notes for it. And then these are the dimensions for the different style main hoops that you could run. And you'll notice that both of them are 1 5/8, so 1.625 by 083, okay, regardless of the design. Now, obviously, I think you can go thicker on the diameter or the wall, I believe. I believe these are just minimal measurements. But you can't go smaller or thinner in either of those measurements, if I remember right. Or maybe it might be the diameter you can't change, but you can go thicker. I'm not really sure. For the most part, all of this is going to be the same diameter they call out for, or bigger. So like some of the floor stuff, instead of running, I think you can run like some 1.25 or 1 inch bars in the floor. Or some of the gussets too. Like some of the gussets you can run 1 inch. I'll probably run 1.25 gussets or something like that. So I will run bigger on some of the stuff. So what we got here, this is like your traditional 25-2 funny car cage setup. Really any funny car cage is kind of going to be like this, where the main hoop and the back funny car cage area is all flat. You'll see a lot of people just weld these right on their bench, completely flat. There'll be no bump out in these or anything like that. Mine will most likely have a bump out, and the number 10 main hoop bar here will be angled forward a little bit. But this bar here that goes to the bottom of that main hoop is your number one bar. Now, in some chassis, or I would probably say the majority of chassis, that number one bar is also going to have your 4-link brackets on it. So your brackets for your 4-link will be on the number one bar. And there's actually a caveat where you can make these two 18s. You can turn those two 18s into your 4-link. So if your 4-link's in that area, you can run a plate on the back of your 4-link to box it in, and you don't need those 18s. With the low prep brackets, I don't think that'll work. So I'll have to have 18s, I believe, on either side of that, on those 4-link bars still. So I'll probably have to run 18s in there. And honestly, with this thing being such a street car and me just going more safe than not, I have no problem welding in extra bars or more bars than I may need. So as long as it's not going to hurt the performance or safety of the car, I will add things to it. No problem. So, so what we got is this number one bar. We'll have our 4-link brackets. So the 4-link will come off of here to brackets that are on this number one bar. Now, if the seat is going to be right in this area, okay, say the bottom of the seat is, right there. Then the main hoop will come off of this, and this will be the true number one bar. But say I put the front seat all the way up here. So say I got the front seat up here, which is basically where the stock would be. I would run another bar right behind the seat And that would actually be my number one bar. And then the area back here would just be the rear half of the car. So this would no longer be called the number one bar. It would just be, this would be the number one bar. So the number one bar is the bar that's directly the rear cross member bar behind the seat where the main hoop goes. That's how they quantify where the number one bar is. So depending on what I do with the seats and interior, that may move. But I also may put the seat way far back. I haven't decided yet. So seeing where this is, I'm leaning towards trying to do the main hoop forward some, doing the seat here and then the funny car cage coming behind it. I'm not 100% sold on that idea, but that may be something I do. So what we got here is this bar. And what I did is in my CAD program, I will upload the document right here. And as you can see in that, I have the rear end with the 4-link bars and the front brackets and my number one bar in that picture. And so I have all my measurements that I need to go from this rear bar to here. I have other checking measurements from the axle tubes to here, and then height measurements too. So what I was able to do is run the laser. So I got my ruler. See if I can get this on video without it being too ugly looking. Yeah. So basically, I can put this. Now this obviously, whatever number's on here isn't correct because I can't actually see it. Only the camera can see it. But you put it on the bottom of here and then you go back and forth until you find the correct measurement. You know, whatever the shortest point is where this ruler would be straight. And then I go there, and then I do the same thing on that bar there, okay? So on the back side of that bar, I can pull that same measurement like that, right? So by doing that, with that laser's level, by taking those two measurements, I can compare the bars' height differences, and that will tell me exactly where it is. Now, what I ended up doing is bringing this number one bar a little bit lower. I think it ended up being about 150 thousandths lower than in that CAD drawing. The reason for that is because I'm okay with moving that axle up and down wherever it needs to be. The wheel tubs are going to have plenty of vertical height. So I'm not going to run into issues with the wheel tubs or the chassis or anything. If I need to shove those tires way up in there, I can. But what I want is drive shaft clearance. I don't want to have to put a bended number one bar in there. So that number one bar is super low to the car. So if we can get a quick measurement here, it's only about an inch to the bottom of the rocker. So you can probably see over there, see if I can zoom you in so you can see at this good angle. It's only about an inch from there to there. It's only about an inch to the bottom of the rocker. So it's pretty low. That bar is about as low as I want it. And that should leave me about 3 inches. Well, that bar will be 4 inches to the ground, so the rocker will have about 3 inches of ride height. So, hold on, oh gosh, this ruler's pain. So I'll have about 3 inches of ground clearance on the bottom of the rocker, which is plenty. I mean, that's more than enough. I'm happy with it. That'll keep the axle up. That should keep the drive shaft plenty of distance away. I could actually put the drive shaft in there to show you if I wanted to real quick. Actually, that wouldn't be too big of a deal. We'll just do it real quick. And then you can also see that, you know, I got the level here. So the level, this thing's zeroed from side to side. And then obviously I'm measuring here and measuring here height-wise to the laser level. And it's giving me the same measurement too. And then to make sure that it's straight in the car, I'm measuring from the tube to the seat belt hole there. And then from the tube to, there's a pinch weld spot right here, there's where the sheet metal breaks. So each side's the same. And what I'll do to double check that too is I'll drop a plumb bob off of the shock tower down on both sides, and then I'll actually measure from that bar to the shock tower. But I need a second person to do that kind of measurement. I can't do it by myself, so I'll have my buddy come over. We'll drop some plumb bobs on the shock tower and then get that measurement too to really make sure that that's straight. But I wanted to drop the drive shaft in there real quick. See how that looks. I could have used a lighter bar. Ooh. All right, my little tape bushing in there. And then, man, look at that. That is some good old-fashioned clearance right there. That's about 4 inches. 4 inches on 1 3/4 inches. So 1 3/4, and then from the bottom of that to the bottom of the other tube to the number 1 bar, this was about 4 inches here. And it's gonna be a 3-inch drive shaft. So that's 1 1/4 inches. Half of 1 1/4 inches is 5/8 of an inch. And then you take 5/8 of an inch off of 4 inches. So it's gonna be 3 3/8. So that should be my clearance with a 3-inch drive shaft to that, which is good because separation on a slick tire is only going to be about 1 inch. And if I ever run a radial on the car, I can address it at that point. But honestly, I'll probably never run a radial on the car. You know, I may run a 26-inch slick, which will reduce that a little bit, but I'm still only going to have about 1 inch of separation with that kind of slick. 2 inches at the most. So it may get close. If I have to address it and redo that number 1 bar, I'll kick myself and I'll be upset. But I think I'll be okay. I should be able to bring that axle up even higher if I need to, up into the car. So I can get myself into that 4 or 5 inch range pretty easily, especially at the track, you know. So if it's a situation where like I got to do a quick ride height adjustment to drive it on the street, I will. That's not that big of a deal because I have to unbolt the shocks to change the tires anyway. So when I'm doing drag and drives events, I'll be unbolting the shocks, dropping the axle, changing the tires. So if I have to put them in a different hole to drive down the street at a little bit higher ride height, that's no issue. It may be something I just do anyways. So these are just things that I'm thinking through. I'm trying to kind of proof myself and make sure that these aren't problems. And one of the main reasons I don't want to put a bended number 1 bar in there is because this is a street car. If I have a low point like that and I'm on a crowned road, a road with a big crown in the center, that for sure is going to be a scrape point. And I don't want to scrape my chassis. I don't want to scrape the powder coat off of it. I don't want to damage the chromoly. So I just want a flat bar. And if there's a crown on the road, it's just going to give me that much more clearance, right? So that being 1 inch lower could be a major thing on bad roads. And I've just ran into that situation where something in the center of the car is the lowest point and it hits. I've had it happen so many times. I don't want to experience it with this car. So I'm going to try and keep a flat bar in it, adjust the ride height where I need to adjust it, and deal with it. If I got to run taller tires for street driving, you know, whatever happens, I'll figure it out. But I definitely don't want to run a bent number 1 bar. I'm going to be pretty happy with that 1 inch height off the bottom of the rocker. I got this thing pretty square. Now, the only other thing I want to talk about before we finish this video up is this bar here. And what I decided to do is I want to be able to pull the body off of this chassis. At least 80% of the body or chassis and body to be bolted. If I got to cut 1 or 2 tubes, I will, but I want most of it to be bolted on. I've seen other people do this where they bolt the body on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make some 1/8 inch thick brackets that look like this. So the number 1 bar will go here, and then there will be 3 bolts. I'll probably use like 1/2 inch or 10 mil, 12 mil, somewhere in there. I'll use 3 big bolts here, and in these plates here, so it'll be 1, 2, 3 bolts, and I'll weld nice deep steel bungs into the plate, and then the number 1 bar will have that plate, this plate here, welded to it, and it will bolt up. And then I'll do the same thing up there to the chassis, and then I'll probably just do like one little one in the middle somewhere, because this will have a frame rail that goes along the side. So this bar here will go along the side. So right here, this is your number 1 bar that we're talking about now that's tied into the chassis. And then our 6B and our 6A bars will be tied into the chassis as well. And then I may just do some little ones off of this that tie into the chassis. So it'll be bolted in 3 spots along the side of the car. So it'll be bolted here, here, and here. And then the center 2 bars that go from these yellow ones here, these 2A bars that are yellow, that go from the number 1 all the way up into the front of the car. Those bars will come all the way forward, bend out and around the trans, go up through to the front K-member. So that Mustang K-member that I'm going to bolt in, those bars will go up there, and then they'll have joints that bolt together. So I'll have bolt together joints that go from those 2A bars, those lower frame rail bars, to the front K-member, so that I can unbolt the K-member still, and then the chassis will be right there. And that will just kind of tie together the K-member to the tube chassis, so that if the car wheelies or is doing anything crazy, it's just got a little bit extra support right there. So number 1 bar, the paint will be here tomorrow. So I'm going to make my brackets, and then I'm going to pull this bar back out now that I know exactly how I want it, how I like it, where it's at. Pull the plates off, paint them, weld them on, put the brackets on, and get this thing going. I'm going to get, hopefully, the brackets put on so that I can slide this back into place. I'll drill the holes for the bungs. Yeah, and then we'll make some more progress. We'll go from there. I'm still trying to visualize a lot of this stuff and like future-proof a lot of these things. So I got a new partnership with Buildco Tools. So I got one of their guillotine tubing notchers coming. This is like hands down one of the best notchers in the industry. I've used buddies of mine in the past. I've never owned one before. I've always wanted to own one. Like I said, I've used one before, and it is phenomenal. I've owned a JD Squared one. I've used a Mittler's Brother one. I've used a couple different cheap ones. The guillotine style notcher that Buildco makes is just so good. It can do brackets. It can do crazy tight notches. It can do multiple angles. You can do 2 tubes at once. It's worth its weight in gold. Wait till you guys see this thing. Hopefully it'll be here next week. Once it gets here, there's a couple little pieces that I need to notch up for the rear end. So I need to make the little piece that comes off this bottom bar for a jack point. So I wanted to make a little jack point right there. And then also so that like you could hook it to like, if I got a tow hit or something like that, I can pull it from that point on the rear end. So I'm going to notch that up and get that made. And then once all this stuff's done here, we can start really get rocking and rolling on the lower chassis portion too. I have to decide on the main hoop for sure. I want to contact one of the NHRA guys that does the chassis certs and try and ask him some questions about that main hoop. And I want to see how much of an angle I can tilt it forward. It's kind of non-traditional for people to do, but I can't find anywhere in the book that says you can't. Online, I see that it's like 20 degrees either direction, and it should be fine. But I hate that it should be fine when I build a whole chassis and they go, well, I can't certify this. I would be, I would just be beyond myself, right? I would be so upset. So I want to make sure that anything I do is legal. Unfortunately, the book isn't very specific on certain things, so I'm going to try and contact somebody and answer some questions. I hope you guys learned a few things. It's kind of a long-winded video of me just rambling on, But we're just making more progress each day, guys. And I appreciate you tuning along. Have a good night.